An unassuming gentleman. Claudia Reed pushed her cart carefully through the narrow aisle of the luxury airline, her steps precise and practiced. Years of traversing these aisles with quiet grace had sharpened her instincts. As a senior stewardess for the airline, she could gauge passengers almost instantly, sorting them into neat categories in her mind. The power brokers, the globe-trotting business people, the celebrities hiding behind sunglasses, and the occasional anxious flyer. Today, her roster included an especially wealthy array of passengers, each surrounded by an aura of entitlement and privilege. She moved past a woman adorned in layers of gold jewelry, barely listening as she ordered another glass of champagne before takeoff. Her mind was already drifting toward the next passenger in line, a man in a tailored suit, seated quietly by the window. She felt her gaze linger on him, a curiosity blooming somewhere beneath her professional detachment. He wasn't the typical first-class passenger. There was a calmness to his presence, an air of confidence that didn't demand attention, but somehow captivated it. Unlike the others, who signaled for her with familiar glances or tilted glasses, he sat immersed in a worn leather-bound book, his fingers turning pages in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The cover was Age, its title obscured by the passage of time. Claudia found herself perplexed. She was used to the silent language of first-class passengers, but this man seemed to operate outside of it. Instead of lounging arrogantly or glancing around to assess his peers, he appeared entirely at ease, like he could be anywhere in the world and feel equally at home. Her usual poise faltered slightly as she approached his seat. "Would you like a warm towel to freshen up before takeoff?" she offered, her tone brisk yet polite. He looked up slowly, meeting her gaze with a slight, courteous nod. "Thank you," he said softly, accepting the towel with a gentle touch. His fingers, she noticed, were lined with faint scars, not the pampered hands of someone born into wealth. She was accustomed to the soft hands of executives or the manicured nails of socialites. This man's hands hinted at a story, one she couldn't place. Claudia lingered, hoping he might initiate small talk. "Interesting book," she ventured, a slight hint of her curiosity slipping into her tone. "Yes," he replied, his voice calm, as though he had just woken from a pleasant dream. His eyes held a depth that made her uncomfortable, as if he could see beyond the facade of her polished appearance. "Quite," he added after a pause, and then returned his gaze to the pages. The dismissal, however mild, stung her pride. Claudia prided herself on her ability to command a moment, to engage even the most aloof of passengers with her poised professionalism. But he hadn't even looked twice, his attention already back on the book, his focus unbroken. She turned sharply on her heel, suppressing the rush of irritation that warmed her cheeks. She could practically feel his calmness echoing behind her, a reminder of her inability to unsettle his composure. Over the next few hours, Claudia found herself glancing at him more than once, half hoping to catch a glimpse of his elusive personality. Every time she walked by, he would be there, unbothered, reading or occasionally gazing out the window, the vast blue sky reflected in his distant stare. When she finally served the main meal, she observed his choices, simple, minimal. He didn't order an extra drink or request special treatment, only smiled politely, as though grateful but uninterested in excess. It was unlike anyone she'd served in this cabin, where decadence was often demanded as a birthright. Claudia's curiosity grew, morphing into an obsession that went against her better judgment. This man didn't fit. He was a puzzle, one that didn't even seem to want to be solved. As the flight wore on, her intrigue deepened, and a spark of resentment began to simmer beneath her professional veneer. He sat in first class, dressed like the rest of them, yet he seemed utterly different from them. What was he hiding? What made him so sure of himself? By the time dessert was served, her quiet irritation had become an uncomfortable itch, one she could barely suppress. Claudia couldn't shake the thought that he might be mocking her in his silence, seeing through her polished manners and measuring her against some invisible standard. "Excuse me," she said finally, as she leaned over to collect his dessert tray. her voice tinged with forced cheer. "You seem to enjoy traveling often." He looked up, his calm eyes meeting hers with a mild surprise, as though he hadn't expected her to speak. "Yes, I do," he replied simply. She swallowed, frustration tightening her throat. "May I ask, where are you headed? If it's not a secret, of course." Her tone was light, but she felt the question hang heavily between them. He smiled, a small, thoughtful smile, as if considering her question more deeply than she'd anticipated. "Wherever the wind takes me, I suppose," he said softly, turning back to his book, his eyes lingering on the page. Claudia blinked, caught off guard. It was a poetic answer, but one that revealed nothing of substance. The mystery persisted, gnawing at her, pulling her attention away from her duties. Her colleagues noticed her distracted state, casting her occasional glances, but she ignored them, her mind locked on the enigma seated by the window. As they began their descent, Claudia went through her usual routine of preparing the cabin, but her focus was fractured. When she finally collected herself enough to make a formal announcement, her voice trembled slightly. A rare occurrence. She'd faced turbulence, rowdy passengers, and even emergency landings, but something about this man's calm self-possession unnerved her, making her feel small, as though her polished exterior was just that, a fragile shell. When they touched down, the passengers began to gather their belongings, preparing to disembark. Claudia felt a strange reluctance as she watched him close his book, with a finality that suggested he was returning to a world far removed from this plane. She wanted to say something, to break through the barrier he had so effortlessly erected, but words failed her. He gave her a polite nod as he rose, a gesture of respect yet coolly distant, and began making his way toward the exit. She was left standing there, feeling as though she had just encountered someone monumental, yet he was slipping away, untouched by her gaze. As the passengers exited, Claudia watched his back disappear down the terminal, a silent ache spreading within her chest. She didn't know why it mattered, but she felt as though she had lost something intangible, something important. The soft click of the cabin door closing brought her back to herself, but she couldn't shake the strange heaviness that remained, lingering in the wake of the man who left her questioning everything she thought she knew about her role, her life, and herself. An unsettling revelation. Days turned into weeks, yet the memory of the mysterious passenger lingered in Claudia's mind, stirring feelings she couldn't easily categorize. She had served thousands of travelers during her years as a stewardess, yet no one had left a lasting impression quite like him. His calm demeanor, his piercing gaze, his quiet, unassuming confidence, they'd unsettled her in ways she hadn't expected. Back on solid ground, her days returned to their regular rhythm. Claudia worked her shifts, pushing carts, handling passengers' needs with polite efficiency, and returning home to her small apartment in New York City. She went through the motions with practiced grace, but something had shifted within her. She found herself watching people more closely, seeking out glimpses of the same quiet confidence she'd seen in the stranger. But it remained elusive. One late evening, Claudia met up with her friend Sarah, who was also a flight attendant, for a drink after a particularly grueling shift. They sank into the comfortable chairs of a dimly lit bar, the city humming beyond the large windows. "What's up with you lately, Claudia?" Sarah asked, swirling the last of her wine. "You've been different." Claudia sighed, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I guess you could say I met someone," she admitted, not even sure if it was the right way to phrase it. Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, really? Tell me everything." "It's not like that," Claudia clarified quickly, though she could feel her cheeks warming. "I didn't actually meet him. I mean, I served him on a flight. But he was different from the usual first-class passengers. He was calm, quiet, like he didn't need to prove anything to anyone, and he barely noticed me, which is strange because I usually have a way with passengers, you know." Sarah laughed. "So, you're interested because he didn't fall under your charm." Claudia laughed too, but there was a hollowness in it. Maybe. But it felt deeper than that. Like he saw right through me. Sarah tilted her head thoughtfully. Sometimes people come into our lives to shake things up, even if we don't know why, she said. Maybe you needed someone to knock you off your game a little. Maybe, Claudia murmured, though she wasn't entirely convinced. After her shift the following week, Claudia found herself browsing online, looking for something to pass the time. She hadn't thought about the passenger's identity in a while, but as she scrolled through social media posts, a familiar face suddenly appeared on her screen. Her breath caught in her throat. There he was, the man with the book, his quiet gaze captured in a candid photo at an event. The caption under the photo identified him as James Whittaker, a philanthropist, entrepreneur, and founder of a charitable foundation aimed at supporting underprivileged communities worldwide. The revelation stunned her. She had assumed he was wealthy from his first-class seat and tailored suit, but she'd had no idea he was that influential. He owned a network of businesses, yet he spent most of his time on humanitarian projects, traveling to remote locations, offering aid, and creating opportunities for those without privilege. As she read more, her mind spun. This man, this unassuming gentleman who had left her questioning her own sense of worth, was quietly making a difference on a global scale. She was used to passengers flaunting their wealth, demanding attention. James Whittaker, it seemed, had no interest in impressing anyone, which only made him more compelling. The more she read, the more unsettled she became. Here she was, working a job that often felt repetitive and hollow, catering to people who often took her kindness for granted. She thought about the years she had spent perfecting her image, her polished appearance, her rehearsed smiles, her unwavering professionalism. But now she found herself questioning the purpose behind it all. What had once felt like an accomplishment, making it as a senior stewardess, earning the respect of her peers, now seemed superficial. She couldn't help but wonder, had she been measuring her success by the wrong standards? Was her life nothing more than a performance? In the days that followed, her frustration grew. She felt trapped in a role that no longer fit, confined by the expectations she had placed on herself. She found herself snapping at minor inconveniences, her patience thinning. Her colleagues noticed, and even some of the passengers remarked on her change in demeanor. Claudia's usually impeccable composure was starting to crumble. One day, as she prepared for a long-haul flight to Tokyo, Claudia's mind wandered back to James Whittaker. She wondered what he would think if he saw her now, mired in an identity crisis triggered by a single encounter. Part of her wanted to meet him again, to see if he would recognize the inner turmoil he had unwittingly sparked within her. Another part of her wanted to forget the whole thing and move on, to bury this restless longing beneath layers of routine. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As she took her place near the front of the cabin, preparing for boarding, she felt a strange premonition settle over her. She pushed it aside, forcing herself to focus on her duties, but as she scanned the faces entering the cabin, her heart skipped a beat. There he was, James Whittaker, dressed in a simple button-down shirt, a small bag slung over his shoulder. He took his seat in first class, unaware of her presence. Claudia's heart raced. It felt surreal, like a twist of fate she hadn't dared hope for. She watched him settle in, his usual calm aura exuding an unspoken sense of ease. He opened his book, and once again, the world around him seemed to fade as he immersed himself in its pages. Claudia gathered herself, took a steadying breath, and approached him with the card. "Mr. Whittaker," she greeted him, her voice quieter than usual, though it held a slight tremor. He looked up, his gaze softening as he recognized her. "Ah, Miss Reed, wasn't it?" he asked, his tone warm but distant, as if recalling a fleeting memory. "Yes," she replied, taken aback that he remembered her name. "It's good to see you again." "Likewise," he said with a faint smile, closing his book. "I'm glad to see a familiar face." The subtle warmth in his voice caught her off guard. She felt an inexplicable urge to ask him questions that had been brewing within her, but she restrained herself, unsure of how much she should reveal. "Can I offer you something to drink?" she asked, her tone professional. He ordered a simple glass of water, nodding his thanks as she poured it. But as she moved to leave, he paused. "Miss Reed," he said, his tone thoughtful, "I don't mean to intrude, but you seem different from last time." Claudia's cheeks flushed, the vulnerability in his observation piercing through her polished facade. "I suppose I am," she admitted, glancing away. "I think meeting you made me think about things differently." His eyebrows lifted in gentle surprise, but he said nothing, allowing her the space to continue. "I don't mean to sound presumptuous," she went on, her words tumbling out before she could stop herself. "But after learning about your work, I started questioning what I'm doing with my own life. It's been unsettling." James listened, his expression a mixture of curiosity and compassion. "It's not unusual to feel unsettled when faced with a shift in perspective," he said gently. "Sometimes we don't realize we've outgrown a role until something, or someone, comes along and opens our eyes to other possibilities." Claudia felt her heart pound as his words resonated with her. He wasn't offering her a solution, but somehow his validation made her feel less alone in her confusion. "Thank you," she said softly, grateful for his kindness. He gave her a nod, his gaze steady. "Sometimes, Miss Reed, the greatest journeys aren't the ones that take us to new places, but the ones that lead us back to ourselves." As she walked away, her heart heavy yet strangely uplifted, Claudia felt as though she had crossed a threshold she could never return from. This encounter hadn't provided her with all the answers she sought, but it had given her the courage to seek them. She realized that her life, polished and practiced as it was, had been missing something essential, a true sense of purpose. With each passing moment, she felt a growing conviction within her. For the first time in years, she saw a future beyond the narrow aisles of the airplane, a life beyond her polished uniform and rehearsed smiles. She didn't know what that future looked like yet, but she knew it was there, waiting for her to take the first step. Breaking free. The days following her second encounter with James Whittaker were a whirlwind for Claudia. His words echoed in her mind, a quiet reminder of possibilities she had long pushed aside. He'd spoken of journeys that lead us back to ourselves, and though she couldn't fully grasp what that meant, she knew she could no longer ignore the discontent that had been festering within her. It was as though the polished life she'd worked so hard to build had suddenly grown too small, constricting her like a shell she had outgrown. One evening, as she sat in her small New York apartment overlooking a bustling street, Claudia sifted through her memories of the past few years. The late-night flights, the jet lag, the polite smiles, and rehearsed small talk. Each piece of her life now seemed hollow, devoid of real purpose. She had always prided herself on being excellent at her job, but now that excellence felt like a mask she wore to hide a deeper emptiness. The feeling was almost unbearable, yet liberating. She didn't know what lay on the other side of this awareness, but the idea of change sparked something within her. To break the cycle, Claudia began small. She requested a week off from work, a rare indulgence she'd never allowed herself to consider before. Her supervisor was surprised, even a little concerned, but she approved the time without hesitation. Her friends and family were curious as well, knowing that Claudia rarely took time away from her rigorous schedule. The first few days off felt surreal. Claudia wandered the city, her mind unmoored, her heart pulled in 100 directions. She explored neighborhoods she hadn't visited in years, spent hours in cafes observing strangers, and even attended a community lecture on global humanitarian work, something she had once dismissed as outside her interests. Each activity filled her with a quiet thrill, a reminder that the world was larger and more varied than she'd let herself imagine. One morning, she received an unexpected invitation in her email, a seminar hosted by the Whittaker Foundation, focusing on building sustainable communities. The seminar was open to the public, encouraging attendees to discuss how individuals could make meaningful impacts in underserved areas. It was happening in a few days in New York City, and the idea of seeing James Whittaker again, this time in a professional setting, sent a rush of nervous excitement through her. Claudia dressed carefully that day, selecting a modest outfit that felt true to her rather than the polished uniform she usually wore. As she entered the sleek, glass-walled venue, she was greeted by a hum of anticipation. Attendees milled around, talking in low voices, each person seemingly passionate about the causes they championed. It was a different crowd from the high-class passengers she was used to serving. These people seemed earnest, grounded, driven by something beyond wealth. As the event began, Claudia felt her initial nerves melt away. The speakers discussed topics ranging from education to healthcare, emphasizing the impact of collective action. Each story filled her with awe and admiration. She could feel her spirit stirring, her discontent finding a voice amid the speaker's words. Finally, James took the stage. He spoke with quiet authority, his voice steady and measured, drawing the audience in without theatrics. He discussed the Foundation's recent projects, detailing their successes and the challenges they faced. But more than the logistics, it was his sincerity that resonated with Claudia. He didn't speak as a wealthy philanthropist, but as a man committed to a cause, determined to make a difference. As he concluded, Claudia's hands were already moving before she could stop herself. She joined the line forming for the cue and a session, her heart pounding as she waited her turn. When she finally stepped forward, James's gaze met hers, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Miss Reed," he said, a gentle smile curving his lips. "It's a pleasure to see you here." Claudia's cheeks warmed, but she steadied herself. "Mr. Whittaker, thank you for everything you shared today. I've been thinking about our last conversation, about what you said regarding journeys that lead us back to ourselves. I guess I'm here because of that." James nodded, his eyes encouraging. "I'm glad to hear it. Finding a sense of purpose is one of the most challenging yet rewarding things we can do. I've spent years in a career that I thought defined me," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But now, I'm not sure who I am without it. Listening to you, and to everyone here today, I realized, maybe there's more for me beyond my current life. I just don't know where to start." James' expression softened, and he leaned forward slightly. "Starting can be the hardest part," he said. "But sometimes, the best thing to do is to take small steps. Look for opportunities, explore areas that interest you, and don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone." The words seemed simple, but to Claudia, they felt like a lifeline. She thanked him, her heart lighter as she returned to her seat. For the remainder of the seminar, she took notes with a fervor she hadn't felt in years, her mind buzzing with ideas and possibilities. The concept of doing something meaningful, of stepping into a field that would allow her to make a real difference, was terrifying but exhilarating. As the seminar concluded, Claudia felt an unusual surge of determination. She approached a few of the event organizers, asking about volunteer opportunities within the Whittaker Foundation. They were welcoming, encouraging her to attend their volunteer orientation, which was happening the following week. The thought of dedicating even a small amount of her time to a cause she cared about filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in a long time. The following week was a whirlwind. Claudia attended the orientation, learning about various ways to get involved. She was assigned to a local community project, assisting with logistics and administrative tasks, a far cry from the glamorous world she was used to. Her first day of volunteering was humbling. She helped set up classrooms in an underfunded neighborhood school, organizing supplies, and working alongside volunteers who had been dedicating their time for years. It was exhausting work, and at first she felt out of place, her tailored background jarring against the roughness of the environment. But as the hours passed, Claudia found herself drawn into the community's warmth. The teachers, the other volunteers, the children, they were so genuine, their gratitude tangible in every interaction. She felt something unlock within her, a small but growing sense of belonging. Over the next few weeks, Claudia split her time between her job and her volunteer work, each experience widening the gap between her polished persona and this emerging, truer self. She found herself looking forward to the days she spent at the community center, her passion reigniting as she saw firsthand the difference even small actions could make. She met people from all walks of life: teachers, social workers, community organizers, each one driven by a commitment to uplift those around them. Their dedication humbled her, inspiring her to push further, to do more. One day, while organizing a donation drive, Claudia spotted James again. He was meeting with the foundation's project leaders, discussing an upcoming initiative. She hadn't expected to see him, and the sight of him brought a surge of mixed emotions. Part of her felt nervous, still in awe of the impact he had on her life, but another part felt something new: pride. She had taken his advice, had stepped into an unknown world, and it was transforming her. When he caught sight of her, he walked over, his gaze warm and familiar. "Miss Reed," he greeted her. "How have things been since the seminar?" "Life-changing," she replied, her smile reflecting the pride she felt. "I'm volunteering now, helping with the foundation's local projects. It's nothing like my old routine, but I've never felt more alive." James nodded, his approval evident. "I'm glad to hear it. It's not easy stepping into something unknown, but you seem to be handling it with grace." Claudia felt a surge of gratitude, her heart swelling with appreciation for the journey his influence had set her on. "Thank you, Mr. Whittaker. If it weren't for you, I don't know if I would have ever found the courage." "You don't owe me thanks," he said gently. "You had the strength within you all along. I just helped you see it." They stood in comfortable silence, both aware of the profound shift Claudia had undergone. She knew she was still at the beginning of her journey, but she felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. For the first time in her life, Claudia had stepped out of her carefully curated world and embraced the unknown. And though it was daunting, she felt a profound peace within her, a quiet sense of fulfillment that had been missing for far too long. As James departed, Claudia watched him go, the gratitude and inspiration she felt swelling within her. Her life, once neatly contained in the narrow aisles of an airplane, had opened up to possibilities she had never dreamed of, and she knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning of a new and meaningful journey. Confronting new realities. In the weeks that followed, Claudia became more deeply embedded in her new role at the Whittaker Foundation's local outreach programs. She'd started as a volunteer, spending her off days from the airline assisting with anything she could, but her dedication quickly attracted the attention of the program directors. Before long, she was offered a part-time position coordinating community events and educational workshops. It was a far cry from the world of luxury travel she was used to, but she felt a fierce sense of purpose she hadn't known before. Her new role wasn't without challenges. From the start, Claudia was struck by the intensity of the work. The foundation supported underfunded schools, homeless shelters, and food pantries, places often stretched thin by limited resources and overwhelming demand. As she began managing logistics, coordinating with other volunteers, and working with the community's residents, Claudia's days grew long, the work far more physically and emotionally demanding than anything she'd done before. One Friday morning, Claudia arrived at a community center in Brooklyn to set up for an educational workshop on job skills. The small, rundown building served as a lifeline for the community, offering services from tutoring for young students to job placement assistance for adults. As she carried boxes of supplies from her car, she noticed graffiti on the front wall of the center, harsh words and symbols that mocked the center's mission, as though challenging the very heart of their efforts. Her stomach twisted at the sight. For a moment, she stood there, grappling with a feeling of helplessness she hadn't anticipated. The community center meant everything to the residents who relied on its services, yet it was constantly targeted by those who sought its work as a threat or an inconvenience. She brushed off her frustration and set about her work, though the weight of the graffiti lingered with her throughout the day. Claudia helped the attendees register for the workshop, smiling at each one, yet she couldn't shake a sense of unease. Her former life had been glamorous, carefully curated to mask any imperfections, But here, in this worn-down center filled with stories of struggle and resilience, she felt the rawness of reality. As the workshop began, a young woman named Alyssa approached her. Alyssa had been coming to the community center for months, using its resources to complete her GED and search for stable work. She was determined, often volunteering her own time to help with various events and lending a hand whenever needed. "Hey, Claudia," Alyssa said, her voice low. "Did you see the wall outside?" Claudia sighed, nodding. "I did. It's frustrating, to say the least." "Do you know who did it?" Alyssa shook her head. "No one knows for sure. People in the neighborhood aren't exactly happy about the center being here. Some think it brings the wrong kind of people to the area." Claudia frowned, taken aback. "But we're here to help. Why would anyone want to tear that down?" "It's complicated," Alyssa said, her gaze dropping. "Some people just don't see the value in it, I guess. They think it brings trouble. But for people like me, this place is everything." Claudia felt a pang of sympathy. She had seen firsthand how transformative the center could be for people like Alyssa, who relied on its services as a stepping stone to a better life. Yet, for the first time, she was beginning to understand the tension that could exist between helping a community and earning its trust. After the workshop ended, Claudia returned outside, staring at the graffiti with a heavy heart. The words were crude, meant to discourage and demean, and it struck her just how far her journey had taken her from the polished world of first class and high expectations. Here, the challenges were real, the stakes higher than anything she'd ever encountered before. It was a battle of hope against hostility, of compassion against indifference. The next morning, Claudia sat down with the director of the community center, a woman named Margaret who had dedicated her entire life to social work. Margaret was a fierce advocate, with graying hair and warm eyes that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 stories. "Claudia, I know you saw the graffiti," Margaret said, her voice steady. "It's not the first time, and it won't be the last. This kind of work comes with pushback. People resist change, even when it's meant to help." Claudia nodded, but she couldn't hide the discouragement on her face. "I just don't understand. We're here to support the community, to offer people resources. Why would anyone want to sabotage that?" Margaret gave her a small, understanding smile. "It's about perception. Some people feel threatened by change, even when it's positive. They worry about outsiders coming in and altering the dynamic of their neighborhood. Others don't believe we can make a real difference. Sometimes it's easier for people to accept the status quo than to believe in the possibility of something better." Margaret paused, her gaze thoughtful. "It takes resilience to keep going, to believe in the mission even when others don't." Claudia let Margaret's words sink in. She realized that her journey with the foundation wasn't just about helping others. It was about challenging her own beliefs, her sense of security, and her understanding of what it meant to make a difference. Determined not to let the negativity of a few dampen her resolve, Claudia decided to organize a community cleanup day. She spread the word, inviting residents to come together and repaint the center's walls, turning them into a mural that would reflect the strength and unity of the community. She coordinated with local artists, gathered volunteers, and worked with Alyssa to create a design that represented the center's mission. The day of the cleanup arrived, and Claudia was both anxious and excited. Dozens of residents showed up, from families to elderly neighbors, each one contributing to the effort. Children painted vibrant flowers and suns along the walls, while others filled in meaningful words and symbols. The sight was transformative, and Claudia felt a swell of pride as she watched the center come alive with color and creativity. As the mural took shape, Claudia noticed James Whittaker standing near the entrance, watching the event with a quiet smile. She hadn't expected him to come, but his presence brought a sense of reassurance. When the mural was complete, James approached Claudia, his gaze filled with approval. "You've done something remarkable here," he said, his voice filled with warmth. "This mural isn't just a work of art, it's a message. You're showing the community that this place belongs to them." Claudia felt a rush of emotion, both pride and gratitude mingling within her. "Thank you, James, but honestly, it's the community that made it happen. I'm just here to help." James smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. "True leaders are often the ones who see themselves as helpers, Claudia. You're giving people a space to express themselves, to feel ownership over something meaningful. That's powerful." As the day drew to a close, Claudia felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The mural was more than just paint on a wall. It was a testament to the resilience of the community, a reminder that they had the strength to overcome hostility and negativity. The experience solidified something deep within her. She knew that, despite the challenges, this work mattered. It was a far cry from the high-flying lifestyle she'd once cherished, but it felt truer, more grounded. The days after the mural were transformative. Claudia began to notice a shift in the way the community interacted with her. Neighbors who had once regarded the center with skepticism now stopped by to chat, some offering to volunteer, others bringing supplies. Claudia felt a growing respect between herself and the residents, a shared understanding that transcended words. However, the work was far from over. As she spent more time in the community, Claudia encountered more stories of hardship than she'd ever imagined. She met single mothers struggling to make ends meet, young adults facing barriers to education, elderly residents living in isolation. Each story broke her heart, yet fueled her resolve to do more, to push beyond the superficial support she had once considered sufficient. The culmination of her efforts came one evening, when she was invited to attend a community council meeting as a representative of the foundation. Claudia sat among the residents, feeling both nervous and honored. They discussed ongoing challenges, from housing issues to education gaps, and Claudia took notes, her mind racing with ideas on how to bridge these gaps. When it was her turn to speak, Claudia's voice was steady, filled with a conviction she hadn't known she possessed. "I know some of you may have reservations about the center, about the foundation's presence here," she said, "but I want you to know that we're here to support you, to work alongside you. We believe in this community, in its strength, and we want to build something that lasts." As she finished, she noticed several heads nodding in agreement, a warmth in the room that hadn't been there before. Claudia felt as though she had finally crossed a threshold, leaving behind the woman she once was and stepping fully into the role she was meant to play. That night, as she walked home beneath the city's glowing skyline, Claudia felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Her journey had taken her far from the life she'd once envisioned, but in embracing this new purpose, she had discovered a resilience and compassion within herself she hadn't known existed. And though challenges surely lay ahead, she was ready to face them, grounded in the knowledge that she was finally, truly, making a difference. Sacrifices and transformations. The months that followed the mural project were some of the most demanding of Claudia's life. With each day spent at the community center, her connection to the neighborhood and its people grew stronger. She was no longer an outsider offering distant aid. She was part of the fabric of the community. The challenges were unrelenting, sometimes heartbreakingly so, but each difficulty brought with it a profound lesson, an opportunity to stretch beyond what she once thought she was capable of. Her commitment to the Whitaker Foundation and her work in the community, however, soon clashed with the demands of her job as a senior stewardess. Flight schedules became harder to maintain with her expanding responsibilities, and her constant juggling act was taking a toll on her health and well-being. She felt stretched thin, and a choice loomed before her, one she knew she couldn't avoid much longer. One evening, exhausted from a long-haul flight to Europe, Claudia returned to her small New York apartment. She dropped her bags and sank into the couch, a wave of weariness washing over her. Her life had become a blur of back-to-back shifts at the airline and long days at the community center. She was doing her best to balance both, but the stress of living in two worlds was beginning to wear her down. She looked around her apartment, the space once filled with reminders of her ambitious career. Photos from exotic destinations lined the walls, mementos from cities across the world scattered on shelves. But these objects, once symbols of pride and accomplishment, now felt like relics of a life she no longer identified with. The glossy allure of her old life had faded, replaced by a yearning for something deeper and more fulfilling. As she lay on the couch, her phone buzzed. A message from the foundation director, Margaret, asking her to stop by the community center for an urgent meeting the next day. Claudia's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't been expecting anything significant, but she knew that Margaret only called urgent meetings when something serious was at stake. The next morning, Claudia arrived at the community center, a sense of anticipation and worry swirling in her mind. She greeted a few familiar faces as she made her way to Margaret's office, her heart pounding with each step. Margaret looked up as Claudia entered, her expression weary yet resolute. "Claudia, thanks for coming. Please, sit down." Claudia took a seat, noticing the stack of papers on Margaret's desk. "Is everything okay?" Margaret sighed, folding her hands. "I'm afraid we're facing a funding issue, Claudia. The community center has been running on a tight budget, and with recent cuts, we're going to need to make some difficult decisions." Claudia's stomach twisted. She had seen firsthand the transformative work the center was doing. The thought of it losing funding was almost unthinkable. "Is there anything we can do?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. Margaret nodded, but her gaze was heavy. "We've been reaching out to donors, but it's been difficult. We may need to downsize some of our programs, at least until we can secure more funding." The words hit Claudia like a punch. Downsizing would mean cutting back on services that people relied on. The after-school programs for children, job workshops, food distributions. She thought of Alyssa and the many others who counted on the center as a lifeline. An idea flickered in her mind, a daring thought that sent a rush of adrenaline through her veins. "What if we held a fundraiser?" Claudia suggested, the words spilling out before she had a chance to second-guess herself. "Something big, something that would attract people who don't usually know about the work we're doing here." Margaret considered her, a glimmer of hope sparking in her eyes. A fundraiser would be ideal, but organizing something of that scale takes resources and time. And right now, our staff is stretched thin. "I can do it," Claudia said, her voice steady. "I'll take the lead. I've done event planning through the airline before. We could reach out to local businesses, maybe even get a few high-profile names involved to bring in more attention." Margaret's eyes softened with gratitude. "Claudia, that would be a huge undertaking. Are you sure you can handle it with your other commitments?" Claudia took a deep breath. She knew what Margaret was asking. She couldn't keep both feet in separate worlds anymore. If she committed to the fundraiser, it would require her full dedication, something her airline schedule would never allow. "Yes," she replied, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. "I'm ready to make this my priority. I've realized that this work is what I'm truly passionate about." Margaret nodded, a look of understanding passing between them. Claudia left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose, but also with a heavy heart. She knew what she needed to do next, and it wouldn't be easy. That evening, Claudia sat down and drafted a letter to her airline supervisor, formally announcing her decision to leave her position as a stewardess. Her hands trembled as she typed, each word feeling like a final goodbye to a chapter of her life that had once meant everything to her. But as she reread the letter, she felt a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, she was choosing a path based not on status or expectations, but on a genuine calling. When her resignation was officially accepted, Claudia experienced a bittersweet mixture of emotions. She was grateful for the experiences her airline career had given her, yet she felt an undeniable thrill at the thought of fully dedicating herself to the community. The sacrifice was real. She'd be giving up the stable income, the comfort, and the familiarity of her old life. But the cost felt worth it, a small price to pay for a life of purpose. With her newfound time and freedom, Claudia threw herself into planning the fundraiser. She reached out to local businesses, inviting them to sponsor the event or donate items for an auction. She contacted artists, musicians, and even former airline colleagues who had connections to celebrities willing to lend their name to the cause. Each day brought new challenges, from securing permits to managing logistics, but Claudia met each obstacle with resilience. Her apartment transformed into a makeshift office, filled with stacks of papers, event posters, and donation boxes. Her once glamorous life felt miles away as she worked late into the night, fueled by determination and caffeine. The weight of responsibility was heavy, yet it was a burden she welcomed. On the morning of the event, the community center buzzed with energy. Volunteers and local artists decorated the venue with colorful banners and posters, creating an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. Claudia moved from one end of the room to the other, coordinating the final details, her heart pounding with anticipation and nerves. As the guests began to arrive, Claudia watched with awe as the center filled with people from all walks of life. Residents, business owners, volunteers, and a few familiar faces from her past life. She spotted James Whittaker among them, his presence a steady source of encouragement. He approached her with a smile, a proud gleam in his eyes. "You've done something remarkable here, Claudia," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "This event will have a lasting impact on the community." Claudia felt a rush of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without the support of everyone here, and without your guidance. You were the one who inspired me to take this path." James's smile softened. "You had the strength within you all along. Sometimes we just need a reminder of our own potential." As the night unfolded, the fundraiser exceeded Claudia's wildest expectations. Guests bid on auction items with enthusiasm, donations poured in, and the local musicians filled the room with lively melodies. Claudia moved through the crowd, thanking each person personally, her heart brimming with pride and gratitude. Near the end of the evening, Alyssa approached her, a shy smile on her face. "Claudia, I just wanted to say, thank you. You've done so much for all of us. I don't know where I'd be without the center." Claudia hugged her tightly, her eyes filling with tears. "This place is as much yours as it is mine, Alyssa. You belong here, and you're going to do amazing things. Just keep believing in yourself." By the end of the night, the foundation had raised enough funds to keep the community center running for another year. The success of the event filled Claudia with a profound sense of accomplishment, but more than that, it reaffirmed her decision to leave her old life behind. She had found her place, her purpose, and the sacrifices she made along the way now felt like stepping stones to something greater. As Claudia closed up the community center that night, locking the doors behind her, she looked back at the mural, a vibrant tapestry of colors, symbols, and words that captured the spirit of the neighborhood. It felt like a mirror of her own journey, a testament to resilience, transformation, and the power of human connection. Standing alone in the quiet night, Claudia felt a peace she had never known. She had given up a life of luxury and stability, but in return, she had found a purpose that filled her soul. The sacrifices had been real, the challenges unrelenting, but she knew with every fiber of her being that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The ultimate test of purpose. The weeks following the fundraiser were filled with renewed hope and momentum. With the funds they'd raised, the community center was not only able to sustain its current programs, but also to expand services, providing additional resources for after-school tutoring, adult education classes, and a job readiness program. Claudia poured herself into her work, her commitment to the foundation growing stronger with each passing day. Yet, as fulfilling as her new role was, she would soon discover that it was also a path fraught with unforeseen challenges. Tests that would push her limits and force her to confront her deepest fears. One brisk autumn morning, Claudia arrived at the community center to find a small group of people gathered near the entrance, their expressions uneasy. A few held protest signs, while others stood with arms crossed, watching her as she approached. Her heart sank as she realized they were protesting the presence of the center, the very place that had become a lifeline for so many in the neighborhood. As Claudia approached, a woman stepped forward, her face stern. "Are you in charge here?" she demanded, her tone accusatory. On one of the coordinators, Claudia replied, doing her best to keep her voice calm and professional. Is there something I can help you with? The woman's eyes narrowed. We're here because this place has been causing problems in our neighborhood. There's been an increase in foot traffic, and it's bringing in people who don't belong here. It's not safe for our children or our community. Claudia felt a pang of frustration, but she knew she needed to handle the situation diplomatically. I understand your concerns, she said, choosing her words carefully. But the community center is here to serve the neighborhood. We offer resources that help people find jobs, gain education, and improve their lives. We're not here to cause harm. We're here to help. Another man in the group scoffed. Help? All we've seen is more litter, more noise, and people hanging around who don't live here. This neighborhood doesn't need a charity project. We don't want outsiders coming in and changing things. The words stung, and for a moment, Claudia felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. She had poured her heart into the center, believing that it was a beacon of hope and transformation. Yet here were her own neighbors viewing it as an unwelcome intrusion. Taking a steadying breath, she addressed the group again. I understand that change can be challenging, and I want you to know that we're committed to addressing any issues that arise. If you're open to it, I'd love to sit down with you and discuss how we can make the center more beneficial for everyone in the community. Her offer was met with skeptical glances, but a few people seemed to soften slightly. Fine, the woman said, reluctantly, but we'll be watching. As the group dispersed, Claudia felt a weight settle on her shoulders. She'd encountered resistance before, but this was different. The thought of her work being seen as a threat to the very people she wanted to help was painful. Yet she knew this was part of the journey, learning to bridge the gap between intention and perception. That evening, Claudia called a meeting with the Foundation's team to discuss the backlash. Together, they brainstormed ways to engage more directly with the community, to make the center's impact more transparent. Claudia suggested hosting an open house, inviting local residents to tour the center, meet the staff, and see firsthand the programs they offered. The goal was to foster trust, to show people that the center was a resource for everyone, not just for a select few. In the days leading up to the open house, Claudia felt the pressure building. She knew the event could either improve relations with the community, or, if handled poorly, further alienate people. She poured all her energy into preparing, arranging for program demonstrations, inviting local leaders, and personally reaching out to residents who had expressed concerns. When the day finally arrived, Claudia was filled with nervous anticipation. She welcomed each visitor personally, guiding them through the center, introducing them to the programs and volunteers, and sharing stories of the lives the center had touched. She watched as people's expressions shifted, their initial skepticism softening as they saw the impact of the center's work. One particularly memorable moment came when Alyssa, the young woman Claudia had mentored, spoke to a group of visitors about how the center had helped her finish her GED and find stable employment. Her story was raw and honest, and as she spoke, Claudia noticed several people wiping tears from their eyes. It was a powerful reminder of why the center existed, to create opportunities and to uplift those who needed it most. By the end of the event, Claudia felt a sense of relief. The open house had been a success, and many of the residents who had once viewed the center with suspicion now left with a new appreciation for its mission. Yet, Claudia knew that this was just one step on a long road. Winning over hearts and minds would take time, and she was prepared for the journey. But the greatest test of Claudia's resolve was still to come. One chilly November morning, Claudia arrived at the center to find the doors shattered, glass strewn across the entryway. Her heart raced as she took in the scene. Vandalized walls, overturned chairs, broken computers, and supplies scattered across the floor. The center had been broken into, the vandalism seemingly deliberate. Claudia's hand shook as she dialed Margaret's number, informing her of the situation. Within an hour, the police arrived, along with a few of Claudia's colleagues. They surveyed the damage, the the somber reality of the situation settling over them like a thick fog. "This wasn't random," one of the officers said, his tone serious. "It looks like someone wanted to send a message." The implication hung heavy in the air. Claudia felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. She had devoted herself to this center, to building something meaningful, and now it felt like her efforts were being torn apart. The sense of helplessness she'd felt during the protest returned, sharper than ever. Margaret put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Claudia. This center has survived worse, and it's not going to stop now." Claudia nodded, her mind racing. As devastated as she felt, she knew she couldn't let this act of hostility defeat her. The center was more than just a building. It was a lifeline for people like Alyssa, a place of hope for families struggling to make ends meet. She couldn't let fear or anger overshadow that purpose. In the days that followed, Claudia organized a cleanup effort, rallying volunteers to restore the center. Word of the vandalism spread quickly, and people from all over the neighborhood came to help. Residents who had once been skeptical, families who relied on the center, even strangers moved by the story. Together, they worked side by side, scrubbing away graffiti, replacing broken furniture, and repairing the damage. As they worked, Claudia saw the resilience of the community in action. She realized that the center's true strength wasn't in its physical structure, but in the people who believed in its mission. Each person who showed up was a testament to the power of unity, to the strength that could arise from adversity. When the repairs were complete, Claudia decided to organize a rededication ceremony for the community center. It was a symbolic gesture, a way to reaffirm their commitment to the neighborhood, to show that they would not be intimidated or defeated. She reached out to James Whittaker, inviting him to speak, and arranged for local leaders and residents to share their own stories. On the day of the ceremony, the center was filled with people. Neighbors, volunteers, donors, and beneficiaries gathered in the newly restored space, a sense of unity and pride filling the air. Claudia stood before them, feeling the weight of the journey she had traveled, the sacrifices, the struggles, the moments of doubt, and knew that each challenge had led her to this moment. James took the podium, his words powerful and heartfelt. "This community center stands as a beacon of hope, of resilience, and of courage," he said. "It's a reminder that even in the face of adversity, we have the strength to rebuild, to rise together. And that strength comes from each and every one of you." As James spoke, Claudia looked out at the crowd, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. This center was no longer just a job or a cause. It was her life's purpose. She had faced her fears, sacrificed her comfort, and embraced a role she never could have imagined, and in doing so, she had found herself. When the ceremony ended, people lingered, sharing stories, connecting with one another, and celebrating the resilience of their community. Claudia moved through the crowd, shaking hands, hugging friends, and feeling the warmth of their shared spirit. As night fell, Claudia stood outside the center, gazing up at the mural on the wall, a tapestry of colors and symbols that told the story of their journey. She knew there would still be challenges, that there would be moments of hardship and setbacks, but she was ready. She had found her purpose, her true north, and she would dedicate herself to it with everything she had. With a quiet, determined smile, Claudia turned and walked into the night, the community's strength and her newfound purpose lighting her path forward.